be a day off school, and for some reason you'd find yourself on front of a television, and it was BBC Schools, and they'd say, "There's a breakdown. Please listen to some music for a minute."
Oh,
While
yes. And used to get the test card on.
Absolutely. For some reason you'd find yourself on front of a television. Hang on, I just need to switch, because we've now online, so I can say, just for those of you watching, we had one or two technical glitches, so we've had to very, very quickly start have to start from scratch. So we're about 3 minutes late, so I do apologize from that. But for those of you who don't know, we're discussing this month about lobbying and refurbishment. It just seemed too obvious a discussion to have, and just to kick us off, with regards to Boris Johnson's week, Andrew, it's not been a good week, has it?
Yeah, well, no, it hasn't. He's been very evasive. I mean, he just needs to fess up. Somebody obviously loaned him some money. We think we know who it is, but someone loaned him some money because he was a little bit skint. And he couldn't say no to Carrie when she wanted to change the wallpaper and the curtains and other decorations around the Downing Street flat. He appears that he's paid this loan back, but he's just not being honest. It's as if he does have something to hide. Now, I know Boris does guard his private life very, very much. He doesn't like talking about it. And he can get quite shirty if you raise the subject. And he always gets evasive about his private life when you raise the subject. And maybe that is just it. He just doesn't want to talk about his private life. But he is giving the impression that he's got something to hide. And that's not good.
No, I mean, it's the mere fact it always goes down on a questioning on the refurbishment. It always goes down to the same point, which is, did you... was the money that was originally paid yours, or was it someone else's? And there's always silence on that point. And that's of concern, because if it was paid by someone else, then, that leaves him open and vulnerable to the charge that he's vulnerable to lobbying.
Yes. Yes, I mean, it does. Everything to do with the Prime Minister's life is political. Really, you can't act in a... I mean, for example, if I wanted to get some home improvements done, I could go to a friend or maybe someone in the family. You couldn't loan me a few grand, could you? And I'll pay you back over the next year, whatever. And people would say, oh, yeah, that's no problem. We can do that. But I'm not in a position of power to award contracts or to be seen to be changing the law or tax rules or anything like that. So therefore, the Prime Minister is and any minister of the Crown is in a completely different position to any ordinary private citizen. And that's why there are rules around this, and very strict rules and laws around this. So I think, if Boris wants this story to go away, which it isn't, it's been rocking along now for days. If he wants it to go away, he's going to have to be completely honest. And if that means doing a mea culpa and apologizing that he did something wrong, well, so be it. But it's better to do it that way than for this to drag on for weeks.
And the more it drags on, the worse it is. I mean, he could have taken a leaf out of... They could take a leaf out of Rachel and my book. And I checked with Rachel last night to see if my memory on this was correct, because Rachel and I married 8.5 years ago, and among the presents we had were John Lewis vouchers, which did very well for because we set up home just before we got married, so it came in very well with the home for furnishing and items, etc. And this is the bit that does get me the most. What's wrong with John Lewis? It's not like you'll buy anything on the level of buying a Skoda or anything like that. They seem to be fairly respectable.
I don't think there is anything wrong with John Lewis, and I think Boris is saying it. I mean, do you honestly think that Boris is bothered about the decorations in the number 11 flat? I mean, he's not bothered. We know where it's coming from. It's coming from Carrie. And it may be that Carrie doesn't like John Lewis. Well, that's completely her right not to like John Lewis. But I mean, I do like the way the company has sort of used this as a good marketing gimmick, which, is good on him. And Andy Street was interviewed about it, and obviously the West Midlands mayor and the former boss of of John Lewis, and he said, "We always knew we couldn't please all of the people all of the time." So I think that's a bit of a blown up story, to be perfectly honest. And as for Skodas, well, I do have a Skoda Octavia estate. And I have to say they're nothing like the Skodas of the 1980s.
I should clarify for anyone watching who's offended.
I'm not offended in the least.
I know, and I should apologise to you wherever you take them, which I do apologise. But my vision of Skodas always goes back to when I was about 14 or 15 at school in the 80s, when there were the classic jokes about them. Whereas now they've gone way beyond that.
Well, it's owned by VW, and VW basically what I've got is a sort of something very similar to VW Passat estate, and they are completely different. I mean, they're a pleasure to drive, but anyway, let's not get on to Skodas. Looking at this, and also looking at all the other lobbying stuff that's going on at the same time, the lobbying scandal with David Cameron. So obviously, I think we do want to cover that one. Doesn't it prove that David Cameron really is an absolutely hopeless lobbyist?
It does. It's not that. It's that what bugs me. It's not just that he's a hopeless lobbyist. Well, two things bug me. One, it raises questions about his character that over issues that go past several years. And, I am aware that, we all make mistakes in life. We all make errors of judgment. Sometimes, perhaps we make catastrophic errors of judgment. Mm-hmm. And David Cameron is no exception. So part of me feels really reluctant to drag up stuff from when he was Prime Minister, both personally and politically, where you felt that he did not reach the mark. But so that's one level where you feel it's in character, which is a little bit disturbing. You don't really want to dwell on that. But the other thing is, I was reminded, I saw recently one of Michael Cockrell's documentaries, which I always love. And this one's about how to be an ex-prime minister. And it was made when Tony Blair resigned. And of course, the only former prime minister who was available for interview then was John Major. Margaret Thatcher was in her twilight years. And I think, there was no other surviving former prime minister at the time. And John Major said that when he was talked about his post-prime ministerial life, he said the one thing that was clear in his mind is not to go in for lobbying. Didn't feel it was right and proper for a former prime minister to be lobbying. He worked for companies or certain boards groups like the Carlyle Group, but he made sure they were in positions where his office was not used to actively lobby others. David Cameron doesn't seem to have. He seems to have missed that one important point about, at least do's and don'ts that former prime ministers. It's a lack of respect. It strikes me, the whole Cameron thing, a lack of respect for the office and a lack of understanding of what's expected of him, because in some ways it's almost like in the US, where in the US the former US president is still referred to as Mr. President. We're not quite like that. We're a different system in the UK, but you still have the aura of having been prime minister even when you've left office, and so you have to respect that to a degree. And a lot of former prime ministers, Conservative and Labour, get that, but you get the impression Cameron didn't quite read the subtext.
Well, the only reason I said he was a hopeless lobbyist is because it was just a bit of a joke at the beginning, to be honest, because there are some very serious things that you've just mentioned. But on top of everything that you've said, and I'll go through them one by one, but I generally agree with you, he's also pretty hopeless at it as well, which makes it even worse. No, a former prime minister should not be going around working for lobbying companies. A former prime minister would be great. Well, if it's possible they would be greatly respected in Whitehall, the chances are that they would be. And then you start putting officials in positions where they can't say no because it's a former prime minister, it's a senior person. So, officials shouldn't be put in that position. Rishi Sunak, I don't think he's really done anything wrong. I know there's going to be an investigation into all of this, but it strikes me as if Rishi Sunak was doing his best to back David Cameron away, but didn't quite know how to. And there may be questions to answer, and we'll see what happens. But I will put the ball, firmly in David Cameron's half there, because he was the one who was trying to do this. And as far as that Michael Cockrell documentary, you mentioned Tony Blair. I don't think Tony Blair ever watched it then, did he? Because he's gone down the same sort of route. Kazakhstan, advising the government there, some dodgy people he's been working for, and I think that demeans the office as well. And you should have respect for the office of Prime Minister. Otherwise, if you don't have respect for the office of Prime Minister, why should anyone have respect for the office of Prime Minister? Former American presidents just do not go down this route, as far as I can see. They set up their presidential library. They have certain charities that they work for. They tend to make quite a few quid out of after dinner speaking, but they still keep themselves away from the main political stage, and that is the right thing to do. And I think when Theresa May eventually leaves Parliament, I think she will probably do something very similar.
And there is this old-fashioned thing with politicians, wasn't there, or former prime ministers, where they would leave the office of prime minister, but they would still be active in Parliament, whether in the Commons or the Lords, and we don't see that now either.
Well, we don't, and there's a very good reason for that. I think we both know what the reason is, and that is if you go to the House of Lords, you have to sign the Register of Members' Interests.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them do not want to know what they're involved with. And I think the same can be said for Tony Blair. I think that's pretty obvious when you look at some of his dealings. I just don't think Gordon Brown wants to be in the Lords. I think it's as simple as that. I don't think there's anything dodgy about what Gordon Brown is doing at all. David Cameron, well, it's pretty obvious why he didn't want to sign the Register of Members' Interests. John Major, I also think, didn't really want to go into the Lords. And Margaret Thatcher, yes, did made a lot of money out of after dinner speaking and things like that, but it was all declared. We all knew about it. She had nothing to hide. So she was quite happy in the Lords. It's interesting, though, isn't it, that the last former prime minister that went into the Lords was Margaret Thatcher, and she left office over 30 years ago.
And before Theresa May, the last prime ministers to stand for the Commons again after having been prime minister were Wilson, Heath, and Callaghan. I do find it, a little bit ironic that the former prime ministers who were widely disliked in office, well, I say widely disliked, pilloried by the press, lost in a general election, etc., are the ones who end up being highly respected. This is generally, not as in every single one. And those who are charismatic, lauded from the rooftops, as I end up in these situations. I'm talking only of the last 30 years.
The last 30 years, yeah. No, that's true. You do have a point. The two most charismatic prime ministers, obviously after Margaret Thatcher, well, John Major certainly wasn't charismatic. Tony Blair was. Gordon Brown wasn't. David Cameron was. Theresa May isn't. And certainly, the two most charismatic, Blair and Cameron, are the ones now who really haven't covered themselves in any form of glory. So it does say something.
Where do you think things will be going with Boris Johnson now?
If the stories about Boris being skint are true, and of course we don't know how much money.
I'd be surprised if he was.
Well, he does seem to have, I'll phrase this delicately, he seems to have an unknown number of offspring. So he's got a lot of that to pay. I don't think Carrie is cheap, put it that way. She seems rather expensive. And also, whenever he does any form of entertaining, for example, checkers and things like that, he has to pay for it all himself as well. Yes, he used to make £250,000 a year writing his Telegraph column, but that was on top of other things that he was doing. Now he's prime minister, he can't have any of those outside interests or be paid for anything else on top. So it's all relative, isn't it? I mean, for us, how much? I can't remember what the prime ministerial salary is. About £157,000 a year, I think, around about that figure. But if you've been,
sorry, a lot of people in this country would love to have that.
Of course, I mean, I would love to earn that, but it's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you've been living a lifestyle where you've been earning £400,000, £500,000 a year, that is one hell of a pay cut to take. It's all relative. And I think Boris's lifestyle has been quite expensive over the years, and he hasn't realised that it's really going to cost him to be prime minister. Now, once he leaves office, of course, he can open up many income streams, and he won't be badly off. But prime ministers in office tend not to be all that well off unless they've got a lot of money behind them already, which of course Cameron did. But Cameron's just greedy. I think that is basically Cameron's problem. He's greedy. He wants more money. He wants more money. He wants more money, rather than settling for something less and a very comfortable lifestyle.
It's not going to damage the Conservatives, though, is it? I mean, when you think about it, I mean, I don't. Normally, when these scandals happen, they damage the party they're in the long term. I mean, I think the whole sleaze allegations around cabinet ministers and MPs around John Major didn't help the Conservatives at all during what was for them a very vulnerable period. I think some of the diciness and dodginess that was around to a lesser degree, but was there under Blair and Brown, didn't help them.
Yeah.
And both of them have been in government for similar periods of time. The Conservatives are now in their 11th year. I can't see this harming them.
No, it won't. I think it's different. So, for example, Cash for Questions under the ministerial sleaze during the major years, because it was, as you've rightly said, it was different ministers, many MPs. So therefore, the party gets tainted by it. But with this, despite Keir Starmer's attempt to paint this as a huge Tory sleaze scandal, I think the voters can see that it isn't. This is Boris Johnson with questions to answer as Prime Minister, and David Cameron, isn't even an MP and hasn't been since 2016. It's nearly 5 years since he was in the House of Commons. He's probably still a member of the Conservative Party, but that's just about it. He doesn't have any influence in the Conservative Party, and there aren't any other MPs who are taking crisp 20s in a brown envelope. So there's none of that. So I don't think this is going to stick at all for the Conservative Party. But the Conservative Party has also helped, and no doubt we'll look at how some of this relates to the elections that we've got in 6 days' time. But Keir Starmer does not have the cut through where he needs it. He needs it in the north. He needs it in the Midlands. He needs to claw back some of those red wall seats, and he has to start doing that with the morality elections. So he has to do that in Teesside. He has to do that in the West Midlands. Andy Burnham will obviously hold on to his job in Greater Manchester, but he's got to do it through council elections. He's got to do it through Police and Crime Commission elections, assembly elections in London. And one would assume that Sadiq Khan will comfortably hold on to his job as mayor of London. But holding on isn't doing particularly well, is it? You've got to start gaining seats and gaining more influence in whichever way that you possibly can. And Keir Starmer's leadership does not have that cut through, and that is Labour's problem.
He did well. I mean, I agree. Don't get me wrong. I agree with you. He did very well at PMQs on Wednesday, though, didn't he? For the long term, as well as
he did do very well at PMQs. But how many people really watch PMQs? I think those of us who are interested in politics try to make out that PMQs can be the be all and end all. What a great week he had of Prime Minister's Questions this week. He really whipped the Prime Minister's ass there. Great stuff. But the ordinary person in the street who doesn't think about politics from one election to another isn't really interested in that.
But it is long term as well, because some of what Keir Starmer what Keir Starmer was trying to do at P&Qs was to pin Johnson down on saying where he could end up saying something that could incriminate him in the long term.
Yes.
So what we saw on Wednesday could have been a depth charge for something later on.
It could be. And if he continues to do that, I mean, Tony Blair did that with John Major week after week. He got the better of John Major. And of course, that eventually had cut through in the country. But if he just has this good performance or strings a couple together and then Boris Johnson hits back again, it's all on as even, then, PMQ doesn't really make a lot of difference. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Johnson won't resign over this, will he?
Yeah.
No.
No. And of course, I mean, there's the irony here that if Boris Johnson is found guilty by the Standards Commissioner, he goes to the Standards Committee, they decide on a punishment. It has to be voted on by all MPs. And the Conservative Party will just put a whip on their MPs to stop any sanction. So it's a wonderful system, isn't it? Really not. But that's what will happen.
Which means the more independent group, which is not going to happen anytime soon. So again, we're back to square one.
We are back to square one. I mean, really, the Standards Committee should be allowed to decide. Simple as that. It's made up of MPs across all parties. Chris Bryant is the current chair of that committee, and they should really just decide what a sanction should be, and then that should be it. Because as soon as you put it back to all MPs, it immediately sort of goes down party lines, unless it's something really egregious.
Okay. Well, so I think we're pretty much on one mind this month on all of this.
I think we are. We're reading the political tea leaves in the same way. But I mean, look, it's important to look at these elections because these elections are vitally important. I think there doesn't appear to really be that much cut through from the whole Johnson, cash for curtains, as they're calling it, or cash for cushions, as I've also heard. There doesn't seem to be any cut through there. So it's what's going to happen on these elections in 6 days' time. And I think we probably should speculate a little bit here, Paul, and maybe even do a little election special afterwards to see if any of our predictions are right.
Well, I would say that given the polls and the Conservatives are 11 points ahead, I think Labour are going to be trounced, and it gives. I do find that disappointing, especially over the past year, where Labour have been recovering, but slowly but surely out of the doldrums of the Corbyn years. But one of the things that, as a former Labour person who was a member of the Labour Party when Corbyn came in, one of the things that upset and depressed me about the Corbyn thing is, I'm one of these people in politics who tries to know my political history. And what I've been taught in political history is that when political parties end up with that kind of mess, it takes literally years to recover.
It does.
And so, I knew that whoever was better than Corbyn taking over from Corbyn might not be the person who would bring things back to old glories. So I'm under no illusions, Andrew. I'm expecting I'm expecting us to be trounced, or Labour Party to be trounced, and for the Conservatives to do well. There'll be some gains, but there'll be some gains in the red wall. But other than that, there'll be nothing that will be like, yes, we're getting somewhere.
I think the big one will be the Hartlepool by-election. I can't think of the last time that a party that was in government actually gained a seat at a by-election. History. I think I'll have to Google that one because that will have been a long time ago. I mean, traditionally parties lose, either lose seats or they certainly don't gain a seat. And Hartlepool, by looking at all the polling and what the odds the bookies are offering, it looks like the Conservatives could win that. So that's going to be an interesting one. I think Labour picked the wrong candidate there. and been mired in all sorts of controversies ever since. And then there's a tagline that the Labour Party put out about the Conservative candidate living in a tax haven when her ex-husband, who she was with at the time, married to at the time, was actually trying to do anti-corruption stuff out in the Cayman Islands, and Angela Rayner just kept digging a hole for herself. So I think they've got problems there. But as I say, I know some of the players in all of this, especially in the northeast of England, where I originally come from. Ben Houchen, as the Tees Valley mayor, has done what he said he would do. At one point, he said he would sort out Teesside Airport. He would bring it back into public ownership, which he did. And then he got a company in who knew how to run airports and got them to run the airport. And up until COVID, I mean, they were doing very well. They were bringing in new routes. So he said he would do that. That was a major plank of his manifesto, and he's done it. I think when politicians stick to their manifestos, they tend to do all right at the next election. So I can't see Labour gaining the Tees Valley mayoralty, and I can't see Liam Byrne taking back the West Midlands. I think it's going to be another close run thing, but that's my hunch reading between. So maybe this is going to be a shorter conversation than I thought it was going to be, because I tend to agree with you. And police and crime commission, that's the only thing I'm voting on next Thursday, if indeed I even bother to vote. If I sit this one out, it'll be the first election I have not voted in since I was allowed to vote.
I'll be voting, albeit through the precautions we now need. But it will be. I will be voting Labour. I know the councillor, or the person standing for council in Wilbur. So, or know of them well enough. I'm a bit out of sync than I used to be. But that will be, I suppose that in itself will be an interesting experience, because obviously I haven't been into a polling station in 2 years. So
yeah, it's a while since I've been in a polling station, because I was in Brussels on the day of the general elections. I had to vote by post doing that. I can't remember.
Of course, it's December last year. So yeah, and about nearly 18 months. Sorry.
The last time I voted in person at a polling station, I was actually on the ticket for the Brexit Party for the European election. So sort of voting for myself as well a little bit.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, as I said, we've just got police and crime commissioner elections. Now, we used to support police and crime commissioners, but really, I think as I look across the country, they're pretty ineffectual. I mean, it's currently a Labour police and crime commissioner in Humberside. The previous one, the first one, was actually Conservative Big John Prescott. And he's a bit too authoritarian for me. He's a decent enough bloke, but he's a former police chief superintendent. And I get the impression that he's used to giving orders and he doesn't like to be challenged. And I'm afraid as a politician, you have to get used to being challenged.
Yeah.
But, and he's saying, this is what I've done, it's a much better performing force. We've increased the number of officers by about 25% and things like that. But I just wonder how much that is down to him, and how much it's down to the new chief constable who came in, who's really sort of taken the force by the scruff of the neck. The Conservative candidate, well, the original Conservative candidate, had to pull out because he's been reported for election fraud, apparently not being allegedly, I'll have to use that word, allegedly not being honest about some parts of his life in his election manifesto. And there's a Lib Dem candidate, and the Lib Dem candidate is a former police inspector from the Metropolitan Police. And I just think, well, do I really want any of them? If to be honest, I think if I go for any more, you may surprise you to hear, I may go for the incumbent, who was a Labour one, only because he's got a track record. His track record's pretty decent.
It does remind me what you were saying earlier about being authoritarian. When the Duke of Wellington held his first cabinet meeting as Prime Minister, and someone afterwards asked him, how did it go? And he said, it was incredible. I gave them their orders and they wanted to discuss them.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? If you,
Yeah.
you know, if you get, I don't think former generals make particularly great leaders of countries, and they will be accountable and democratic. And maybe it's that when the former senior police officers are perhaps not the best people to be the politician in charge of the police. But we are where we are, and that's it. But I mean, I think the one thing for certain is that the number of people voting for police and crime commissioners will increase, simply because everyone is voting in the country, aren't they? I mean, or I'm just voting for police and crime commissioners, but in Hull, for example, they're voting for the council as well as the police and crime commissioners. So there'll be more people voting for them. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. But maybe we should do that. Yeah, you would do a post-election special. You can wear black. You can wear.
I will keep an eye on the results, and we will do the autopsy, as it were.
Yeah, this is. I mean, we've never had anything like this before, thanks to the elections being cancelled,
and of course the Scottish Parliament as well.
Well, indeed, we should not forget them, should we?
And the Northern Ireland Assembly. And the Northern Ireland Assembly, is it Northern Ireland?
No, Welsh.
No, they're not. No, I apologise.
I think they're next year, actually, Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I'm so used to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland being at the same time.
But Scotland and Wales.
Yeah, it's probably a good thing Northern Ireland aren't having elections at the moment. But
well, yes, I do feel that Eileen Foster has been made the sacrificial lamb in that respect. The DUP signed up for the Northern Ireland Protocol, but she's been the one who's been sacrificed to, because it's not going very well. I'm sure there are other issues at play, but we'll see. But Scotland, I mean, we know that Nicola Sturgeon has managed to survive all of this, all of the scandal around her leadership. We know that the SNP will be the largest party, probably not get a majority, but then they'll just go in with the Greens. But it'll be interesting, I suppose, what happens, because you've got George Galloway and of course Alex Salmond. Now they're not fielding constituency candidates. Yeah, but I mean they're obviously opposing sides.
I know, but I mean, what a choice.
Well, well, indeed. But I suppose, I mean, if you're pro independence, you may be tempted on the second choice to put more Labour Party candidates in because of the way that the system works. The better you do at the constituency level, the fewer top-up seats that you get, despite the percentage of your vote. So you can say, well, I'll vote for my SNP candidate here because they're likely to win in the constituency. But obviously, I don't want to vote SNP for the top-up seats because that's really a waste of vote, because I can vote for Alex Salmond's lot. And it's the same with the George Galloway pro-union people, where they're saying, well, if Conservative, excuse me, if a Conservative is likely to win in this seat, vote Conservative. If it's Labour, vote Labour. If it's Lib Dem, vote Lib Dem. But vote for us on the top-ups.
Yeah.
And how much cut through this has got, I don't think it's had much, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
But it will be interesting to look at those results and see what happens.
Yeah, I will look forward to the discussion. I'll try and arrange for it at the earliest possibility moment after the elections. Thank you very much for your time, Andrew. More of a discussion than a debate this time, but worthwhile all the same. Thank you very much, and have a good weekend.
Yes, you too, Paul. Thank you.